I'm Callan Grecia. I'm a painter from Durban. I've got a master's degree in painting from Rhodes University, graduated in 2017, and then I've been on a lot of shows since then. I started painting the internet, I guess, for lack of a better term. I started looking at the way that the digital would translate into the physical and vice versa. I think there's definitely a change of the physical object when you see it digitally, and the same when you see a digital object in the physical world. So that's what I started with. I started with the sort of like whole new aesthetic stuff. This was still in like university. And one of the ideas was this idea of skeuomorphism, which Apple was doing it, where they would make digital features resemble physical things. And from there, I sort of started taking my digital elements. It's not skeuomorphism, don't get me wrong, but I was just thinking of the idea of taking the digital influences, being on these apps, being on Instagram, being active on social media, and having all of this information and translating that information into physical work. We live in a super branded society right now, which is seeing either branding or super familiar, super pop things can make something that might not necessarily be pop way more relatable. It takes it into that sort of pop realm for me. I think this style of painting, I think it is super sort of pretentious, I think, in a way. It's also super accessible. I think once you start seeing the motifs, the work becomes relatable to you in whatever way you've perceived it and what you've related to in the work. I want the work to be multifaceted in that way, so I use a lot of iconography, and I think there's no real rhyme or reason to it. I think I've just been sort of building an alphabet of iconography that I enjoy, that I can use to keep creating paintings from. Yeah, I mean, there's some things that I wish I could turn into iconography without it being pushing people too much in a direction. Seeing those Murakami flowers isn't really it's more of a nudge than a push. Those motifs and those symbols are important in terms of understanding me, and in terms of maybe understanding where I see myself in relation to these sort of things. I think a lot of it's tongue-in-cheek. Having these like signifiers of luxury on the work makes the work luxurious, but it's also not exactly that. It's like fire, it's funny, it's all of these things, but I think it is a little bit serious because I do like these things. I like to look at these things, so they find their way into the work. I've just sort of tried to distill them into these symbols and motifs that are easier to digest, I think. Yeah. Being an emerging artist now, for me, it's been more about trying to sort of manage myself and not fall into the trap of being too cynical, because I think that's what gets you down and that's what keeps you down. One thing that I picked up from the academy that was good was that we are translators of current events. We perceive them, we run them through the filter in our heads, and we put them out in whatever sort of creative form as creators. And I think that all my work has always been political. I don't think it necessarily comes across as overtly political, but I think just by the mere fact of me being a person of color painting, the centuries-old white medium of painting, I think that in itself is political. I've started to think a little bit more on the sustainability of my own practice. I think your practice has to be sustainable in speaking as a painter. You can't be aspiring to paint on these huge multi-panel canvases using the best artist series, oil paints or whatever, because it's not sustainable for your mental health to try and achieve these things that you're not necessarily going to be able to afford or achieve at that time. For me, it's changed, and now I've switched to painting on paper, and I'm starting to look for more recyclable means of work, because there's a lot of stuff that doesn't sell necessarily, or that will never sell, or that will never see the light of day, that could be reused. I'm thinking about making my own paper with old stuff and reusing and recycling and turning that into another process of making work. As an artist now, you don't have to make these huge things to be relevant, because now everybody's not really going to galleries that much. People are on their phones, people are on Instagram looking at art. Right now, the practice is seeing and appreciating a space that I don't think I appreciated enough before, and finding ways to interpret it in a contemporary way. The newer works that are about to come out are almost decorative, almost ornamental, but I think now the work is starting to be a little bit more refined, and a more refined sort of experience of my place in Durban and my experience of Durban, you know. And for me, I finally started appreciating where I come from, because it's just so rich with everything, you know. I think it's Durban going through my filter. It's my experience of Durban going through my filter, and me reaching into the cloud and trying to express all of my interests as a person that, you know, has all these things that I can grab from because of social media and the internet and all of that stuff, yeah.